Good afternoon. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive, and we're here at the home of Inspiria Outdoor Advertising, and Ronnie Ram, our host, and the owner of this small business employs 9 individuals here in White Plains resident, to sign the 2020 budget for Westchester County, which was adopted yesterday by the Westchester County Board of Legislators. We have with us the chairman of the board, Ben Boykin, who's with us here, and the head of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, who honchoed all of the different discussions about the budget, Catherine Borgia. We have our executive team, Deputy County Executive Ken Jenkins is with us, Joan McDonald, who is our Director of Operations. Our Director of the Budget, Larry Sewell, is on other county business, but he sent Gideon Grande to represent him here, and Gideon and Larry were a very strong team on the executive branch side, and I know that the members are here from the legislative staff as well that will be recognized in a little bit. I also want to recognize County Legislator David Tubiolo, who's with us here. County Legislator-elect Vedat Gashi is not yet in office, but he kept an eyeball on everything to get ready for next year. Let's hope next year is as good as this year. We'll keep our fingers crossed. And there are some other individuals here that I'm sure are going to get introduced before too long. From our executive team, let me continue with our Director of Economic Development, Bridget Gibbons, who's with us as well, and a number of other individuals from our team. We're joined by Dr. Marcia Gordon, who is the President and CEO of the Business Council of Westchester. Marcia, thank you for you being here. We have Jan Fisher, head of nonprofit Westchester, who's with us. Ann Janiak, who wears 2 separate hats. We'll use the Westchester Municipal Official Executive Director hat for today, and Kathy Hallis, who heads the Child Care Council, and so many other people that I'm sure I should be introducing, but whoever I missed, I'm sure I'll be told about in the next few seconds. In the signing of this budget, it's important to go back and look at its construct at 100 miles an hour, because it is a unique budget. This is the first time in 9 years that we have signed a budget that actually has in it a cut in county property tax levy. It is a $1 million cut, and that cut was something that was important to our administration, the Board of Legislators, as they looked at the different priorities of the budget, and they used their constitutional responsibility to rearrange certain changes, which we accepted, as brings us today to agreement. But we wanted to make sure that that cut was in place. And it's not that the cut in property taxes in and of itself is a game changer for every family in Westchester County. You pay about 20% of your total county property, your total property tax bill to Westchester County government. The school districts where you live are a much larger portion, 65%, and your municipal government's about 15%. But it is the principle, and that's important for people to understand, is that we recognize that the burden of property taxes is the single largest financial burden that people tell us about and that we're trying to respond to. Now, if you want to cut taxes, cut revenue into the budget, and to do it responsibly, you have to have alternate means of financing the government. Slash and burn philosophy does not work. Most recently, it was tried in the state of Kansas, where ideology drove the train and a major budget gap and problems that had to be reestablished with a major tax increase. But what we intended to do in this budget as presented to the board, and what the board did in their reprioritization of authorities, is to respect the fact that fiscal responsibility is necessary and critical to the future of Westchester County, not just any one-year activity. In this budget, we were able to end the practice of borrowing to pay for operational expenses. The 2 most prominent operational expenses are the annual bill that we get from the state government for pension contributions. Every government in New York State has to pay a certain amount of money every year to keep the system solvent. It's what New Jersey hasn't done. It's what Illinois hasn't done. It's what New York has done, so that our pension system is solvent. And these are legal requirements because there were arrangements made contractually across the county and across the state with our workforce. These are legally binding commitments, and those commitments have to be funded and paid for. And so our obligation in paying for it was not to borrow to pay for it for the future, as has been the practice in the recent past. And as everybody knows, when you borrow to pay for something, you pay the principal and you pay an interest on top of that, so it becomes more expensive. As Ronnie runs his business, he knows that there's certain times he has to borrow to grow a business, and as much times as he doesn't have to borrow, then he avoids the additional cost. And that is better for his bottom line. This budget is not financed on one-shots. Last year, to plug a budget hole of $23 million, we budgeted a one-shot. We didn't have to use the one-shot, and we said we didn't want to use the one-shot. But that tells you that structurally, where we are in our prior level of revenue and expenditures, we had a $23 million hole, and if we had plugged it last year with one-shot, we'd be bereft of a second year to follow up with a similar action. So prudent fiscal policy says do not finance them on one-shots because you can't repeat them year over year. And we also added $10 million to our reserve fund. This reserve fund has been recently as low as $64 million. With this action today, we bring it up to $79 million, $5 million for the course of 2019, and $10 million for the course of 2020. And that is responsible budgeting. That is why this budget got bipartisan support. Friends of ours on both the Republican and Democratic caucuses. In fact, we have a person who's conservative who sits in the Republican caucus who also voted for this. And that represents not only the actions that we took to be fiscally prudent, but also a willingness to work cooperatively across the aisle. Now, it's obviously the prerogative of any member of the press to write the story they want. You can write the story about any number of different things. But you ought to write part of that story about the bipartisan cooperation because you're not seeing that in other levels of government. Now, partisan discord sells newspapers and attracts eyeballs, but working through differences, legitimate philosophical differences, to get to a point where you can agree is important news. And if you don't report that story, then you're not representing the full story of what happened here and being able to do this budget. And I believe it was our fiscal policies that if we can replicate it in 21 and 22, we'll be on the right path to fiscal stability. And that's an important message out of today's situation. This budget also invests in a host of different initiatives that we think are important. And we haven't taken the traditional, well, we're going to invest in these types or these types of needs. There are some that are considered conservative by some, investing in economic development. This budget puts $1 million behind our economic development programs. The Element 46 program, which is designed to try to help an incubator-style effort toward startup businesses of one or two people and a good idea and give them the chance to have a foothold so that they can become a little bit larger business and then a larger business still. Small is the new big in terms of economic development. The days of being able to look for a corporate headquarters to come to Westchester County, the days of IBM, PepsiCo, and those days Nestle and Texaco that came to Westchester County in the 1960s, we might still have one of those yet to come, but that is less likely to be the case. It's more likely for businesses like this one to grow from 9 employees to a larger number of employees as their business model expands. And the way that we do that with the way we spend that money, the way we use our IDA, Industrial Development Agency, incentives, is to help grow those businesses and to do those things in an intelligent way. We have put in this budget for affordable housing $10 million for new homes acquisition, land acquisition, and $10 million for infrastructure, then another $1.5 million for supportive housing programs. Why is that important? Talk to any small business person about the essential nature of getting a workforce that is properly educated to do the work that their business needs to do, and try to figure out how they're going to do that if they can't afford to live in Westchester County. Now, you might live 20, 30 miles away and have a long commute. In my corporate career, I had some long commutes, but that is not the path for sustainability, because a person who has a long commute every day starts looking for a different job before too long, not with you. And we have the realities of transportation in this area that are difficult at rush hour, coming from the north to the south or coming over the new bridge that we have over the Hudson River. All of these realities go into our decision to invest money in housing, as well as the understanding that there's a social need of housing in this county, and you can't ignore it. The last time we tried to ignore it, we got in a big lawsuit with the federal government, and we were required to do a very minimum level of effort. We don't believe in a minimum level of effort. We've just completed a report that will become, now that the budget is behind us, the source of great discussion in the next month, 2 months, 3 months, which shows the crisis of affordability in this county, the number of new units that we need, and the ability to try to offset the cost. And we're not just talking about people who are saying, my taxes are high, I can't afford it. We're talking about people buying into their first home or getting into an apartment, where the cost has nothing to do with their taxes. It has everything to do with the demand for the amount of housing units that you have. And that is a discussion that we will have. Marcia has brought on economic development professional to work with her organization. We'll work together, and we look forward to have that collaboration that's already underway. This budget allocates money as well for environmental initiatives. We look at a number of different things that are necessary and things that are appropriate. We know we have an environmental crisis worldwide. What a county can do to address that is in the very proximate things that we have to do. The transition of our bus fleet to hybrid and then electric buses from regular diesel. Where that process has begun a year ago. We had 78 buses this year. We add additional buses that we transition to make the air cleaner, to use fossil fuels to a lesser degree. And then our regular auto fleet, which we have for people who come in and then go out with county cars to do their jobs in the health department and the DSS department and so forth, to transition that fleet. We can't transition it all overnight. It's going to take a multiple number of years to do it. This budget advances that effort. This budget also includes within it an initiative for additional tree planting. And that's not just something to make things beautiful, which it will, but it's also the necessary way that you cleanse the air environment by having more trees. And if it's going to take a long time for a tree to grow to maturity, then the urgency to plant the tree is right away. The faster you plant the tree now, the faster it starts to produce what benefits it can have. We are looking at programs that involve proper disposal of refrigerant. I told the anecdote that once in my younger and less well-informed years, I got some help to drag a refrigerator to the curb, which I thought was going to be taken as bulk pickup. I failed to take the Freon out of the refrigerator, which means I had to drag the refrigerator back to my property, figure out how to get the Freon out. So I learned a very nice lesson. Fortunately, I was younger and a little stronger in those days. But the bottom line is we need to make something like the disposal of dangerous chemicals easier to do. In the same way that we've opened up the household recycling days that we've done now. They've been fabulously successful. We've reestablished them the last 2 years. And I do say the word we. The we means the Board of Legislators and the executive branch individuals of Westchester County. I mentioned Ken Jenkins here as our Deputy County Executive. Joe McDonald is here as our Director of Operations as well. Her responsibilities, department by department by department, is to get each of those departments to look at ways to improve environmental efforts, to improve operational efforts. And that is part of the we of government. As I've said most recently more than once, it is a mistake to consider that it is a single individual that solves a problem, an executive, whatever level position you think. It is a combination of people working inside government and working with our partners outside of government. And those partners are businesses. Those partners are not-for-profit organizations. Those partners are people in the clergy and in the religious community. Those partners come from individuals who have philanthropic mindset. That is what underpins much of these programs that we have in this budget. We also have put aside $150,000 to make sure that we have an accurate census in 2020. It's an important issue. And we know that if we're undercounted, we are not going to get our fair share of federal and state funding. We know that we're not going to get our fair share of representation in the House of Representatives or even in the state legislature, where seats are parceled out based on population per district. And we want to make sure that we make every effort we can to do that. And we're doing that in conjunction with local Census 2020 committees. The state of New York has been a very strong partner in this, and we have lots of not-for-profits that have prioritized this as an important issue. We've added money for a hate crime specialist in our HRC committee, Human Rights Commission, which will put direct attention to the incidents of hate crimes that have occurred in this county. It is not possible to underestimate how much the climate has changed, how much more encouraged people who hold hate in their hearts feel that a swastika is okay. Using a vile word to describe a group of people by the color of their skin is now okay. To say things against people based on their gender identification. There are more people that feel that is okay to express in a public setting. And we want to make sure that as these things relate to hate crimes, that we can properly investigate them and we can properly publicly educate on these topics, and we intend to do that through our HRC. Our not-for-profit partners are going to receive additional funding. As we approached our challenge when we first came into office. We saw the level of funding, and in the 2019 budget, the budget we're operating under this year, we added a certain amount. I don't want to trivialize it by saying percentages. Not every organization gets the same amount of dollars, and what each organization does is different in content and import. But the wide range of not-for-profit organizations, and of course we focus on child care as being an essential one as part of this budget. But from where we were in 2018 to where we were in 2019, there was an increase. As we proposed the budget in 2020, we increased those categories as the budget went to the legislature, and the legislature rearranged priorities and ultimately to our agreement and added additional resources to that. Let me give a cautionary note to everything that's in this budget. There are storm clouds out there. There's actually literally storm clouds right now. But there are figurative storm clouds out there, and we must be prudent people. We do not know how the state will close what appears to be a $6 to $7 billion budget gap. I served in the state legislature when there was a $10 billion budget gap, and it was closed in part with a reduction of resources that went to school districts. And it put school districts into almost a 10-year reversal of fortune, which they had to push. It was gap elimination adjustments to restore money that was all taken out to balance the 2012 budget that was discussed in 2011 in Albany. It was not pleasant, and we're entering another unpleasant moment. We don't know how that's going to be resolved. We will work with our state delegation. In fact, we're meeting with them tomorrow as a preparatory meeting. We're going to work with the governor. We're going to try to respectfully offer what we think are productive ways to be helpful in that process. But there's no guarantee that a year from now our budget's going to look the way it looks today. We are going to administer this budget to the best of our ability, which includes all of the not-for-profits, all of the departments that we've just discussed, all of the different priorities that we've set. And we know that the bond rating agencies are watching us. Standard & Poor's just gave us a bit of an upgrade, taking us off of negative outlook to stable. And that's because we found revenue streams, and not just the one revenue stream that we all talk about, but we saw some other things. We showed some creativity. That's important. But those storm clouds may be larger than some of the things we have discretion to. So I encourage all of us to be as prudent as we can, and we're going to have to do the same thing. I'm going to have to follow the very advice that I'm giving as how we approach the next year so that we can come to next year and deliver the same combination of things we're talking about now, which is good, positive, progressive policy, to do it with good fiscal policy as well, to do it bipartisanly, to do it working between executive branch and legislative branch, to do it between corporate life and not-for-profit life and the clergy and the government all together in this cooperation. There's two paths that we can follow. We're watching a path in Washington, D.C. today. That is the path of opposition and disunity. That is a path in which one side will not compromise with the other, and we have discord that shakes the republic to its foundations. And we hope that elections will cure that, but most elections never give one side all the power, which means that we're going to have to work together if we want to accomplish anything. And that's one path. We can play the politics of resentment. We can look at the resources that we've been able to generate and misrepresent how much of those resources go for which kind of a service. You can pick one thing out of a budget and say, oh, look, they did this in order to do this, when you know darn well the bulk of what we did was to stabilize the financial picture. But that's the option that people have in a free society. But I will tell you this. I came to this job 2 years ago. I've got a lot to learn in this job. I'm learning every day. But I did not come to this job without an idea of what I wanted to do. And we are executing what I had hoped for, which is a cooperative government that involves a host of us together working together and doing it in a way that can make you walk out of this room today and not jump up and click your heels, but feel like, isn't this what government ought to be? Shouldn't it be cooperative? Shouldn't it be respectful? Even when we disagree in a debate, can't we put our arms around each other and go out and get a cup of coffee together? Can't that be the way we as Americans govern? Well, we don't govern in the United States of America, and we don't govern in the state of New York. We govern here in Westchester County. That's my hope. My hope is that this budget advances that philosophy and in specific spending advances the priorities that we think make the greatest sense for the greatest number of people. And we're here in a small business because a Ronnie Ram and all the Ronnie Rams that function in Westchester County, They want a stable government. They want a predictable set of public policies that they can know exists. Tell me what I have to do, but don't change the rules on me, and let me be free to make the money that I can make and provide the services I can make, employ the people I can make, and they can have a better life. And at the end of the day, that's what we all hope for. So with that thought in mind, I guess I am going to sign the document. And after that, I'm going to open it up for any questions from the press individually. I'll take the questions. And then after that, members of the press are certainly welcome to interview any person that's here. We've been joined by Catherine Parker, the Majority Leader of the Board of Legislators. And if I've missed any other legislators that have walked in the last few minutes, I apologize. But you're welcome to interview Chairman Boykin and legislators Borgia and Parker and any of our not-for-profit colleagues, Dr. Gordon, anybody you want, and one-on-one as you see fit. But I'm going to sign this. If we're setting up a photo op, now's the time to do it.
All right. Marsha, Dan. Sorry, George. One second. Okay, just get people. Tell me where you're here. Come right here. Okay.
How's it going? Is he there already, man?
Should I go with the other side?
I don't know. Let Catherine was the guru.
Oh, it's great. Get the money on that side.
Okay. I'm in the picture.
Are we good? Do we have what do we need to have in the picture, Catherine?
We're good.
Okay, this is Act 249 of 2019, passed by the Board of Legislators of Westchester County by votes of 15, 4, and 1 against on the 9th day of December 2019, certified by Sunday Vanderberg, who's clerk of the County Board of Legislators, and it now requires a signature, approved this day, the 10th day of the month of December. And by the authority you've given me, we now have a Westchester County budget for 2020. Thank you very much. So let me invite our friends in the press to ask any questions they'd like. If they're directed to me, I'll do my best to answer them. If they're directed to anybody else, they'll do their best to answer them as well. Yes, Ty, go ahead.
You said they talked about stormclouds coming, not knowing what the state's going to do. How do you justify giving your staff $40,000 raises, given certainly the history of the finances of the last couple of years?
Ty, justify it because you have people in the county government that have gone 15 years without compensation, who've worked for a long period of time. The pay plan amendment included individuals who are lawyers, about 157 lawyers who are more than willing to leave us and work in the private sector if we could not break 15 years or 12 years of lack of compensation. I justify it because the pay structure of Westchester County is well below that of Nassau County, Suffolk County, and New York City, which are comparable counties, and we all live in the same economic climate that we have that. I justify it by the accomplishments of the people that we brought into the executive branch and this work of the legislative branch. Joan McDonald, who was here, and John Nona, who was not here as county attorney, renegotiated the Liberty Lines contract. As you know, because you covered that press conference, they saved the taxpayers $20 million with that negotiation. So I don't think there's any comparison between the slight increase in pay compared to $20 million. Vince Kapicki of our Department of Environmental Facilities led a team of people that renegotiated the Wheelabrator contract and saved us $17 million on that contract. I don't think an increase for Vince Kapicki is outside of the line of sight. When Peter McCart, who's in this pay plan amendment, identifies a company, New Energy, that can generate for us $1 million a year new revenue that didn't exist, I don't think that's out of line. When you have the creativity to figure out how to negotiate a contract with Airbnb that gives us $500,000 in revenue that didn't exist, that's out of line. I think what's out of line is the emphasis on one element of the budget that's a rather small element in an attempt to sensationalize. I don't accuse you of this, of course. But I think the media's focus on this panders to people who don't really understand what county government does, doesn't really understand the successes we've had, and I think it's because those successes really haven't been promoted. I'm fairly modest normally, but we have, as a county government, we have established a family court in New Rochelle plan that went 8 years without having been established. We had a community development block grant program that went 5 years on the wayside. We put that back on. We opened up the Miller House, which is on the state of collapse, which we were able to put back over the course of 18 months. We had pools down in Yonkers that were closed for 10 years, debate about what would happen. We put those back in line. We had a Playland amusement park that was ignored for a significant period of time. We put energy and creativity into that park. We've raised the attendance better than it was over the last 3 years, got our first new ride down there, and did some dynamic things there. I could, as you know, go on and on. Every one of these things are serious public policy things. And when I was sitting in the New York State legislature and I thought about running for this position, I didn't run for it because this is the best way to be 65, 66, and 67 in my life. That's the time you figure, let's crank it back a little bit, George, and not go crazy. I did the exact opposite. And if you want to talk about pay, make sure you're right that I didn't ask for a pay increase because I'm the one person in this administration that people voted for. You voted for me, maybe you didn't, but I mean somebody voted for me to give me the authority to run this government, and by God, I'm going to run it. And if I think that talented people deserve to be compensated because it takes a medical degree and a public health degree to be your commissioner of public health, and you can't pay them $155,000 and find somebody to do that job. We're looking for a coroner right now who would be the head of our labs and research. You can't pay that person $155,000 and find somebody out there. You see that TV show Quincy with Jack Klugman all those years ago? That's a TV show, man. You got to get a person in the real world who's going to come in and do that job for you. So I am very aggressive in defending what we have done. We have taken a very small piece of revenue to do what was right. Frankly, it should have been done in the last 8 years. It wasn't. Most of the commissioners in our county government, we inherited from my predecessor. I did not, take my cronies and put them into these offices, right? They weren't standing out on a train station platform with me handing out literature in the fall of 17. They were already in their positions as Parks Commissioner, Health Commissioner, Mental Health Commissioner. I walk in the door and I say, we're going to manage this differently. We're going to manage this openly. We're going to let you and the press talk to the commissioners if you want. Don't run it through the ninth floor. We're going to tell the legislators, don't run it through the ninth floor. Talk to the commissioners. Why? Because I know something about business. That's how you manage a business. Ask Ronnie how you manage a business. Ask Marsha Gordon how you manage a business. You manage a business with openness and creativity and drive and determination, and when results come, you compensate them. Next question. Any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
Talk about the impact of that tax increase. You said that sales tax increases in terms of being able to make the budget what it is.
The sales tax equalization generated, we estimate, $140 million. That's a round number. Let me repeat again what it is. It is equalizing the sales tax all across Westchester County. You had in New Rochelle, White Plains, and Mount Vernon an 8 3/8% sales tax existing. That's because cities have the power to ask for and get sales tax rates established for them, and they keep the money, that additional money. Yonkers was at 8 5/8 because 2 years ago, they got an additional half a point that put them from 8 3/8 up to 8 5/8 to stabilize Yonkers' finances. When we asked for that stabilization, we were a point underneath Putnam County and a point underneath Rockland County. We were a point underneath those three cities and slightly more than that in Yonkers, and well below the Bronx and well below New York City and Long Island. So when somebody comes to me and they say, well, you raised my sales taxes, I'm going to shop in Rockland. Don't bother. They're already 8 3/8, and you're going to pay for the bridge. You want to go to shop in Putnam? It's a very fine county to shop in. They're already at 8 3/8. You want to go to Bay Plaza in the Bronx instead of shopping New Rochelle? New Rochelle's at 8 3/8, and the Bronx is higher than that. So what we did is by equalizing the sales tax across the board, we generated $140 million of additional revenue. With that $140 million, we took $42 million off the top and we shared it with municipal governments. Ask Ann Janiak how many communities this year are going to be under the tax cap because they had additional revenue that helped them keep their local property taxes low. And when you get to the spring, ask that of the villages and the school districts, which will then be doing their budgetary situation, have additional money. So $140 million, take 42 off of that. We took $10 million and we put it in our reserve fund. That's $52 million. Somebody count my numbers here because I got to add them up. $52 million when you put 10 into the reserve fund. We've roughly estimated that to pay as you go and not borrow, that's probably in the vicinity of $10 million, maybe 9, it may be 11, we're not 100% sure, but I use $10 million as the general number. So we got 42 and 10 is 52 and another 10 is 62. The one-shot borrowing that closed last year's budget gap, that's $23 million. Now you're up to $85 million allocated out of that amount of money. So when you start to look at how did we use the money, we used it prudently, and the proof of that is Standard & Poor's raising our situation from taking off the negative to the positive. So that was an important part of it. But do not underestimate the fact that in addition to that, some of the other things I mentioned in my rapid-fire approach, that $20 million was saved in the Liberty Lines contract. We were under pressure to just reauthorize that. In fact, as members of the Board of Legislators, when we walked in the door, said, don't reauthorize it. Look at the contract. We looked at the contract. They did some negotiations. We saved $20 million. You had that number up. The Wheelabrator contract, plus 17. The revenue from those two sources I mentioned, that's just the beginning of it. Joan McDonald and the operations team has done a terrific job of moving capital projects through the system faster. You build a project this year as opposed to next year, and you're saving money because it's going to be more expensive to do it next year. Because if you delay it, you kick the can down the road, the price tag is even higher. So I think we did a textbook example of what to do with this money. And obviously, if I seem a little edged about it, it's because I've seen a lot of people say a lot of things that represents a political approach to this rather than a business-like approach to it. When I worked in business, nobody cared what your ideology was. They only cared about the bottom line. So when I come in and do things that are bottom-line oriented and somebody attacks me because of politics, I say, wait a minute. You're not playing fair here, bro. You want me to run it like a business? I'm running it like a business. You know? Other questions? What was this guy drinking before he walked in the room, right? I know what you're thinking.
How much do you expect to generate in
Yes, please.
2020?
I'm sorry?
How much do you expect to generate in 2020?
Well, you know, there's a percentage estimate that's made each year, and you really don't want to make it for for 2020 we estimated 140, maybe a little higher than that now. But here's the problem in terms of estimations. The heaviest quarter of sales tax is this quarter because of holiday shopping. We're not going to see holiday shopping numbers until, I don't know. January 10th. Okay, January. So we make estimates based on, general discussion about how strong the economy is going to be, a 2% increase, something like that in the way of general projections. When we see the fourth quarter, then we'll know how well we did. The second most intense period of sales tax revenue comes from back-to-school shopping. And when we looked at back-to-school shopping and compared it to past years, it was a stronger back-to-school period this year than it was a year ago. But nobody knows how we're going to look in the holiday shopping period until we get to this period afterwards. And then, of course, we've got to go through the whole year. We don't know what's going to happen, the national economic picture. In general, history teaches us that when you have a presidential election, generally the federal government, who's ever in office, makes certain moves to soften the blow of whatever might happen during the presidential year. So I have reasonable expectations that 2020 will look stable based on what we know. I saw someone a couple days ago from one of the major investment firms, and that's how they reinforce that with what they've said to me. A year from now, what we think we'll do in 2021 is hard to guess at this stage of the game. And if we do see some softness in the national economy, then we'll deal with it at that point. And there are other revenue streams as well that are subject to what happens in the economic move. When you levy property taxes, that is a fixed rate warrant. You know what it is you're going to get, and because in our county the communities have to give us 100% of the value back to us right away, we know that that's a predictable revenue stream. We don't know about mortgage recording tax. We know that the SALT decision in Washington was a very bad decision for Westchester and for New York State, and it's reduced the number of mortgages, refis, and so forth. We have had some major corporate refis that kind of block out what's happening with all of the residential refis, but we'll have to monitor and see what the second full year of SALT does for us, and that will be an estimate of how we look ahead. But we think the numbers that are in this budget are very, very doable, very realistic, and not absurdly overestimated. If we find that those storm clouds produce pouring rain, then we as an administration will put together an action plan of what to do about it. It won't be pretty, and we'll present it to the Board of Legislators, and we'll start to implement that which we can do under our authority and that which we need to have the Board of Legislators' approval to do. But at this stage of the game, we think this budget is soundly worked through. We think the numbers are realistic, and we believe we can administer this budget over the course of the next 12 months. Great. Any other questions? I guess I need another cup of coffee. Maybe I don't. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day.